In the brutal chess game of medieval war, the king's brother is a powerful piece. But what happens when that piece decides to play his own game? Back in 1315, Scotland was fighting for its very survival. One man did just that. He was the fiery younger brother of the legendary Robert the Bruce, and he launched a daring invasion of Ireland. His goal wasn't just to help Scotland, it was to carve out his own kingdom and to be crowned High King. This is the story of how Edward Bruce's ambition threw two nations into chaos and left a legacy written in blood, famine, and fire. It's 1314. King Robert the Bruce has just pulled off a miracle. He led the Scottish army to a stunning victory against a much larger English force at the Battle of Bannockburn. Scotland is free for now, but the war is far from over. England's King Edward II refuses to accept defeat, and the threat of another English invasion is always hanging over their heads. Robert the Bruce knows that he needs a new strategy, a way to take the pressure off of Scotland by hitting England somewhere else. He needs a second front. And so his eyes and the eyes of his ambitious younger brother Edward turned west, across the sea to Ireland. For centuries, Ireland had been a chaotic mix of native Gaelic lords and Anglo-Norman barons, all technically under the English king. It was England's piggy bank, a source of cash, supplies, and soldiers. Instigating in Ireland would be a brilliant strategic move. But for Edward Bruce, this was more than just a strategy. It was personal. Edward was a brave and proven warrior, but he was always going to be second best, living in his famous brother's shadow. Ireland was his chance to win his own crown. The Bruce brothers even had an old family claim to Irish ancestry, and they dreamed of a grand Gaelic empire, Scotland and Ireland, ruled by two brothers, standing together against England. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A powerful Irish lord, Doyle Brian O'Neill, sent them an invitation. Fed up with the Anglo-Norman oppressors, O'Neill and other chiefs asked for Scottish help. In return, they offered Edward the one thing he wanted more than anything, the High Kingship of Ireland. So in May 1315, the plan was set in motion. Edward Bruce, with his brother's blessing, set sail with an army of around 6,000 battle-hardened soldiers from the Scottish wars. This wasn't just a raid, they came to conquer. The local Anglo-Norman lords were the first to face them, and they were crushed. The Scottish army was a disciplined and brutal fighting machine, and they marched south, sacking the key town of Dundalk. The invasion was a shock wave of panic for the English government in Dublin. The early victories worked like a charm. Soon after, Irish kings from the north met with Edward and swore loyalty to him. As one Irish account from the time put it, all the Gaels of Ireland agreed to grant him lordship, and they called him King of Ireland. With his army now boosted by Irish allies, Edward's campaign picked up speed. He chased the powerful Earl of Ulster right out of his own territory. He won battle after battle, and in less than a year, Edward Bruce had shattered the myth of English control and made himself the master of Ulster and a terrifying threat to all of English-run Ireland. By the spring of 1316, near Carrickfergus, Edward Bruce was officially crowned High King of Ireland. It was a title loaded with history, but one that hadn't meant much since the Normans first invaded a century earlier. For a moment, it looked like the Bruce's dream of a Gaelic empire was actually happening. But the foundations of his new kingdom were built on sand. The alliance with the Irish lords was shaky, a partnership of convenience more than true unity. Many Irish chiefs saw the Scots as just another weapon to use against their old rivals, whether those rivals were English or Irish. Support outside of this northern stronghold was weak. And the Scottish army, for all its skill, was still an occupying army. They had to eat, which meant they took what they needed from the land, plundering the estates of their enemies, and even uncooperative Irish. To the average person, the Scots just looked like another group of violent men taking their food. This slowly wore away any welcome they might have had. The cracks really started to show in 1317. Robert the Bruce himself sailed to Ireland with more troops to help his brother. Together they marched on Dublin, the heart of English power. They got so close that they could see the city walls, which caused so much panic that the defenders actually burned their own suburbs. But the city's defenses were strong, and the brothers didn't have the equipment for a long siege. They turned back. That was a critical mistake. By not taking the capital, they missed their chance to land a knockout blow. But Edward Bruce's greatest enemy wasn't an English knight or an Irish rival. It was the weather. Starting in 1315, Europe was hit by the Great Famine, a period of failed harvests, constant rain, and bitter cold. By 1317, Ireland was starving. The historical records from the time paint a terrifying picture. In this nightmare landscape, Edward's army went from being liberators to a plague of locusts. His thousands of starving soldiers stripped the land bare, turning the people completely against them. He was no longer a Gaelic hero. He was now called the Destroyer of Ireland. During one awful siege, the starving defenders of Carrickfergus Castle reportedly resorted to cannibalism just to survive. Support for his kingship completely fell apart. The Irish lords who had once supported him now saw him as the cause of their suffering and abandoned him. His army, weakened by hunger and disease, started to dwindle. The tide of the war had turned, not on a battlefield, but in the empty fields of a starving nation. The story of the Bruce invasion is such a dramatic chapter in the shared history of Ireland and Scotland, a wild tale of ambition, alliances, and disaster. By the fall of 1318, Edward Bruce was in a desperate spot. His army was a shadow of its former self, worn down by 3 years of war and starvation. But his ambition wasn't dead. He marched south from his stronghold in Ulster one last time, looking for one final decisive battle. Near Dundalk, at a place called Farhart, he found it. On October 14, 1318, his army clashed with a powerful Anglo-Irish force. Edward, reckless as ever, led the charge from the very front, but this time his luck ran out. The Scottish-Irish army was defeated, and Edward Bruce was killed in the chaos. There was no mercy for the fallen king, his head sent to the English king as a trophy, and his limbs were put on display in different Irish towns. Reflecting the bitterness of the famine years, one Irish chronicler called his death a blessing, writing that it was not done from the beginning of the world a deed that was better for the men of Ireland than that deed. Edward Bruce was the last man ever to be called High King of Ireland. His death was the end of a dream of a united Gaelic kingdom. While the invasion was ultimately a failure, it had huge consequences. For Scotland, the 3-year war was actually a strategic success. It tied up English troops and money, helping secure Scotland's own freedom. For Ireland, the legacy was much more complicated. The invasion brought horrific death and destruction from war and famine, but it also completely shattered the power of the Anglo-Norman colony. The English lordship never really recovered. In the decades that followed, there was a huge Gaelic cultural and political revival all across the island. The story of Edward Bruce is a brutal reminder of what power looked like in the Middle Ages. It was a story driven by the ambition of two brothers, a strategic masterstroke that turned into a personal strategy, and a forgotten war that changed the destiny of two nations forever. If you think stories like this are as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for more trips into the forgotten corners of history. Let us know in the comments, what do you think? Was Edward Bruce a visionary trying to lead a new Gaelic world, or just a reckless adventurer whose ambition ruined Ireland?